In our last lesson, we introduced Kahneman's thinking fast and slow, looking at how it can help us better understand how we react to music. This lesson will present a few more of Kahneman's principles that seem relevant for musicians. Kahneman frequently points out that we have a strong need to see reality in a coherent way. We want events to be connected, not just random. There is something very satisfying and reassuring. We feel we've made sense of the world around us. We look for such stories all the time. This search for narrative coherence is not a conscious decision. It happens automatically in System 1. Narrative coherence depends on three important types of related observations which System 1 is always seeking: norms, surprises, and causes. These are all parts of a convincing narrative. We don't have time to look at these elements in detail here, but I'd like to make a connection between one of Kahneman's subsequent conclusions and music. Ultimately, the search for norms, surprises, and causes is directed toward putting together a coherent story. Without any effort, we integrate our observations into a narrative structure. A narrative always has some key moments that are more important than others. Kahneman emphasizes that memory doesn't store events as a literal moment-to-moment transcription, but rather stores the highlights of the experience. And memory is stored as a story, rather than a simple chronological list of details. The most important aspects of what is stored follow what Kahneman calls the peak-end principle. There's much more importance accorded to climactic or peak moments and ending moments than to the actual real-time duration of the experience. Similarly, in music, not all moments of a piece are equally important. Some are more salient than others, and in the musical narrative, these are the ones we remember most easily. This implies that a composer needs to have clear priorities if the music is to be comprehensible, and the priorities should be the events that are most salient. It makes no sense to spend more time on permutations of the retrograde inversion of a theme than on the main climax of the piece. Of course, the notion of a story in music, apart from the obvious case of program music, needs to be formulated in musical terms. I am not saying here that all music is programmatic, and certainly not in the sense of describing an explicit sequence of events identical for everybody. All I propose is that an extremely common kind of coherence in music functions overall as a kind of narrative framework. A beginning provokes our interest, memorable ideas then develop in comprehensible ways, moving through various highlights and contrasts while maintaining at least some suspense until the end, where the conclusion finally provides some kind of resolution. The music takes us on an emotional voyage where the details of what we imagine are up to us. The fact that music, like language, allows for so many levels and degrees of punctuation and association makes possible extremely rich structures. Music is multidimensional. It's possible to combine various degrees of contrast in one aspect of the music with various degrees of familiarity in another. For example, a familiar motive can be presented with new harmony. The resulting narrative structure can be rich and refined, rather like a story with various subplots, interrelated themes, and surprises. Indeed, much music in the Western canon exhibits just such combinations of familiarity and novelty, continually creating expectations and then playing with them. This is exactly how a good story works. The Sarabande from Bach's French Suite in B minor will serve as an example. Let's examine the details of this musical story. The beginning establishes pulsation, tonality, register, and the harpsichord timbre as its norms. The opening motive, with the suspension on the third beat, creates some suspense. In the second bar, the same motive is inverted and filled out through the addition of 16th notes, increasing momentum. Then Bach adds more 16th note syncopations while the bass moves down stepwise. In measure 4, the rhythm slows back down to 8th notes over a dominant chord, but the sustained 7th in the top part helps to maintain suspense. This first cadence is thus clearly not final. Starting in measure 5, the note values return to 16ths, now continuous, and the harmonic rhythm gets faster once again. The right-hand line gets gradually higher from measure 5 to 7. There are also more on-beat dissonances in these bars, making for greater harmonic intensity. Bar 7 has the most jagged line with several large leaps covering almost 2 octaves. These are the quickest and most dramatic register changes so far in the piece. All this adds up to a rather potent climax. The climax in measure 7 is followed by a cadence in the mediant. Here the contour falls markedly, the lowest register appears for the first time, and almost all non-harmonic tones are eliminated. The harmony also lasts the entire bar, helping to provide a sense of resolution. This cadence is more conclusive than the one in measure 4, but that said, it's still not in the home key, and thus remains at least somewhat open-ending, since this is not the end of the whole piece. To summarize, an intriguing pattern is presented, then it's explored and intensified through various ups and downs, to arrive eventually at a moment of relative stability. This kind of quasi-narrative construction appears in an overwhelming number of pieces in the standard musical repertoire. We've seen in these 2 lessons how a few general notions about how the evolved brain does its job can lead to stimulating ideas about how a composer can best communicate with his listeners. Only by respecting our normal mental limits and capacities can a composer hope to communicate significantly and effectively. Kahneman's model of 2 selves, System 1 and System 2, proves useful here. Given the constraints on System 2, especially in real time, I propose paying more attention to the operations of System 1 in trying to understand our most basic primary musical experiences. The associative machine, cognitive ease, norms, surprise, and causes, and finally our ingrained preference for stunning reality as a story all have direct implications for composers. Since the heuristics mentioned in Kahneman seem to be innate and not changeable by act of will, knowing the facts about them can be useful to theorists as well. Kahneman's insights shed valuable light on how music works as magic on us. For those who are interested in more detail, please see my article on this subject on my website. I would also like to thank Matthew Lane, Mitch Burke, Andrew Shartman, Charles Lafleur, and Sylvain Caron for their perceptive comments at the time when I wrote the article.